thank you very much. And indeed, Alenka, for the generosity, time and effort that you have devoted to this project. And the brilliant book that you again generously sent it to me. I'm very honored to talk to you. So I have a very introductory note about you, and then we will move on to the questions if you don't mind. You can correct me if my introduction is wrong. Professor Alenka Zupancic is a Slovenian philosopher whose work focuses on psychoanalysis and continental philosophy. She's a Slovenian psychoanalytic theorist and philosopher who, along with Mladen Dolar and Slavoj Žižek, have rendered a politically infused Lacanian psychoanalysis possible. Among her books are The Shortest Shadow, Nietzsche's Philosophy of the Two, 2003, Why Psychoanalysis, Three Interventions, 2008, The Odd One In on Comedy, 2008, What is Sex, 2017, and the book that we're going to focus on today, Let Them Rot, Antigone's Parallax, 2023. To my surprise, I checked, I thought like 2 of them are translated into Persian, but actually all of them I have seen in Persian. Well, perhaps there is no, I mean, there is no copyright. I'm sad to say that, yeah, but at least your books are there in Persian.
I know about this, yeah.
You know about that.
It's great. I mean, yeah.
Right. So, Alenka, if you don't mind, I start with the first question, which is why Antigone, and how many times should we repeat Antigone?
First, let me thank you for this invitation and this occasion to discuss these things with you here today. Yeah, I mean, how many times, I don't know, you know how it is with repetition. It is in a way, something is generated through this repetition. It is not simply that we repeat until we finally get it right. I guess the repetition is actually works productive, philosophical, also literal repetition works the other way around. You get it right and you repeat it in a way. I mean, that is then right in different ways. I mean, I like this. I think I point this out in my comedy book, you know, that in French language, they have this interesting way of calling repetitions are all the rehearsals that lead up to the premiere. So it is repetitions leading up to the first one. And I think this is also in a way how we can think about Antigone in all these rewritings of her. And so that in a sense, there is this reverse logic when repetitions lead up to or work together with the first one, with the original. So I don't know, there can be many. It's not that all of them functions in the same way, but still there is a certain interesting percentage, I would say, of these rewritings, of this reimagining of Antigone. It's an interesting high rate of very persuasive, interesting, and in different contexts, very important attempts to recreate this figure. So the other question was why, or did I no?
Yeah, I think you fully answered that. Like why?
Okay.
Why? I mean, because like numerous authors have written on Antigone. I mean,
yeah,
and yeah. So there is something, as you said in the beginning. It's not that we are going to get it right in the end. You know, just the repetition. It's
we repeat the right. I mean, but in different ways. And I think one of the ways. Perhaps to also add to what I said before, why Antigone, there is also this interesting phenomenon that I noticed that Antigone becomes a very crucial point of references almost every time there is some kind of significant movement, shift in the social tissue going on, the kind of significant tectonic shifts in the social tissue. And then she's summoned as a figure to sometimes represent different things, but something that has to do with precisely this in between, this kind of crash of two things, not being on one side or another, but precisely configuring a certain way in which new things emerge or different things emerge through some excess, through some excessive desire even, and so on. So it's this is, I guess, why it's so interesting also. She's so interesting as a figure.
Right, and yet you use the, I mean, interestingly, you use the concept of parallax that comes from Karatani, if I'm not wrong, where like the Kantian notion of the thing, or das Ding an sich, as you say, is no more the transcendental entity beyond our grasp, but that what is discernible only via the irreducibility of antinomic character. I mean, my question is that what makes up this irreducible contradiction in Antigone in order to call it a parallax? If I'm...
Yeah. No, I mean, it's okay. The parallax, it's also kind of simply kind of phenomena of perspective, of option, when you have this kind of impossibility of these 2 points of view, which nevertheless exist or reveal something. But there could be different ways of why I used reasons why I use this term, but one was precisely that Antigone should not be taken as simply one of the sides or one of the figures in this conflict, like Antigone opposed to Creon or to state or whatever. Then we would have some kind of an overall antagonistic configuration, and Antigone as embodiment of one of the protagonists. My point is that what Antigone, also the play, puts in front of us is actually an additional kind of point of view that this paradoxical stance that she embodies produces as an extra. So it's not simply symmetrical situation with Creon, nor is it asymmetrical simply because he has power and she doesn't. It is asymmetrical because she's doubly involved, so to say, in what is going on in the struggle for whatever she fights for. And I think this is very interesting, and this is one way also for me to talk about this parallax, because it is also a view taken on the conflict itself, not an objective view, but precisely a kind of, let's say, emancipatory view, apart from this kind of a view that we can have of objective view on the context in which the two protagonists are adversaries or
Alenka, already in the beginning of the book, you just thematize this subjective violence in Antigone. I mean, you try to reframe the question of violence. I'm quoting you. Could we say that the play begins with Antigone committing an act of subjective violence? What makes this violence, or what makes the presence of violence in Antigone so specific, so special?
Okay. Here there are two questions, because I actually answer the question you quoted negatively. So we can go. We can go into this later. But basically, it's quite obvious that that violence is and has been through all these kind of readings and recreations of Antigone, very important, if not central thread of all this reconfiguring of Antigone. But this is not simply violence in the sense of, I don't know, blood springing all around and this kind of what we call graphic violence. It is also this kind of certain violence of the law, of resisting the law, of doing something completely different, violence of words, of desire, of certain. So it's we need to take violence in a slightly different and also broader sense than just this kind of usual way also in which violence immediately means something bad. I mean, here I also discuss, violence as something which is constitutive of all human subjective positions that are worth naming also, but not in the sense that so we have to tolerate it. There are different kinds of violences at stake. And so this is precisely why I start with this question. If it is simply in the relationship between Creon and Antigone, if this is simply the matter of this classical opposition between, let's say, objective systemic violence embodied by Creon, which is usually, the violence that we don't even notice because it's part of the system and makes the status quo or the business as usual system work, but nevertheless implies a certain amount of violence in order for us to be neutral and perceive it as normal. And then there is this subjective violence when somebody crashes something or defies something or does something and which is perceived against the background of this subjective violence, and stands out as violent without us necessarily recognizing that actually it was that the other side also is violent in a way. But I don't want precisely to not really to reduce. I don't think this is the right reading of what starts the plot here in Antigone, because my reading is that it is actually Creon who commits the first act of this subjective violence. He's not simply a neutral embodiment of the state, of public law, and so on, as he sometimes at least presented. He definitely takes this law further than it would be necessary. It is a kind of his subjective hubris that gets to the fore here, and he does, in fact, his decree is an act of subjective violence which presents itself or covers itself in the name of the law, as the law. My idea is that it is precisely this subjective violence that parades as an objective state of things or the law that triggers Antigone off. That this is what she responds to with her, let's say, violence, with everything that she does, insists upon, forces out in the social tissue around her, and so on. So, I would say that it is that her response is already to this kind of a specific short circuit of very, let's say, of Creon's subjective violence and the cover that he takes or uses the cover of the law to kind of make it enforce it, so to say.
And Alenka, one of the highlights of the text, the original text, and also your analysis, your book too, is that was it for the sake of her child or her husband? She would not go that far, and
yeah.
It is very important for you in your analysis. This relation of like this brotherly, I mean, the brother is dead, not a child, or I mean, not something that can be reproduced. And could you please elaborate on that? Why is it of significance in your analysis?
Because I think it is precisely what makes the figure of Antigone so unique. So also unique not only in the sense that this is rare, but also exceptional in the powers that this position that she adopts, in the power that this position that she adopts can have, and in the power of what it can produce and what it can signify also in different kinds of, let's say, more emancipatory revolutionary movements. And if you allow me to expand on this a little bit, I think this is very, I recently read, after I wrote the book, I read an article by Nazan Üstündag, who is actually points very greatly. I mean, this is about Kurdish female politicians, and she kind of compares or brings the figure of Antigone in this context of the Kurdish fight in Turkey. And she points out, and this is really something that most of the interpretations, I guess, missed, that Antigone does not only transgress this public law, the Creon's decree not to cover this body, but also actually betrays the law of kinship and family loyalty. Because Creon is family, after all. She's her uncle, her mother's brother. And also this claim that you quote, not for the children, not for the mother. We are not talking about, we are really talking about transgressing also, not only the so-called written rules, but also the unwritten rules, if we understand them in this humanistic sense or whatever, old family traditions and so on. So it's very interesting. I'm sorry, my cat has some further comments. So it's very interesting because actually she does both, breaks both laws, and Üstünde relates this very interestingly to this figure, you probably know the name Leyla Zana, who was the first Kurdish woman in parliament. This was, and what happens there, this was in 91, I think, in her first appearance when she took the oath, she broke the law 2 times. First by wearing a hairband in Kurdish colors. These were this yellow, red, green. And then second by adding a sentence in Kurdish to the Turkish oath, which was, and at that time it was still illegal to use in official places Kurdish language. So, but the problem is, but by doing this, she did not only offend the, let's say, Turkish state, who we could say just gave her the parliamentary seat and so on, but also betrayed her fellow party members in a way, because they were all urging her not to do this, to just be there, present there, and so they even tried to make her husband, who was also a famous dissident, to make her not do this, and he refused this. He said she does what she wants. She always did, which is a very good response from a husband, I guess. So, but it's really interesting that, so in a way, she also went against, let's say, her own in some ways, but precisely at the same time fighting their cause, or making their cause all the more palpable and present in this also parliamentary context. And so I think, and here also this Üstünde argues very convincingly that this double access is precisely what kind of moves and compels people to speak and act. It is not simply Antigone's subjective access or her ate, this destiny, necessity, but more like an access, I would say, like this over her subjective position. But nevertheless, it is an act, and it gives body precisely more like to the ate of the community. To the desire, to the spirit of the community, of the real. So this is very interesting, and I think this is what makes Antigone such a recurring figure, because precisely she's not simply some kind of pacifying figure. She's not simply a martyr or a pacifying figure of femininity or whatever thing that would then can be presented. This, there is always an access attached to Antigone and to these figures. And of course, in Antigone, this relates not only to Polynices, but also to her story of incest. I mean, she's born out of an incestuous relationship, her exile also when she's there with Oedipus, and betrayal of some kind of family. So it's, and I think this is very important to keep in mind, precisely not to then just get this kind of too narrow and too misleading kind of humanist picture of, okay, she's a fighter for universal human rights and so on. You can only fight for universal human rights through some very specific, particular, even excessive demands. It's not something that is sold to us in this kind of all-embracing way of race. This is a fight, and here we come back to the question of violence. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to separate this kind of act from a certain kind of violence. I hope this,
definitely. I mean, what is stunning for me, and what was actually was that the publication of the book was quite timely, and it was like in the middle of the protests in Iran, so that I could see how applicable some of the ideas of the book are, although I cannot fully identify everything there. I mean, but one of the interesting things is that Antigone wants to be this consequence that you're talking about. She wants to be the consequence of the law. I mean, like Mahsa being the consequence of the law in Iran. However, not as voluntarily as Antigone, I would say. The force of the law imposes a duty which is absolutely distinct from any question of consequences. The law is no longer sanctioned by the best, like in the Kantian sense, understood as the objective of the goodwill of the just. What is left of the law is only a form, like to observe your hijab in that case, which is by definition cannot be an object of thought. As you say, I'm quoting you about Antigone. You're not talking about Mahsa, about Antigone. She's willing to be that consequence. She feels she can't help but be that consequence. Here lies her ethical stage and her difference from at play in her indifference towards her sister Ismene. Ismene claims that as a woman, they are powerless to do anything about the situation, that all action is useless, pointless, end of quote. Although you make this distinction from Ismene, you also make it brilliantly clear that Antigone's persistence is different from a kind of subjective stubbornness. What is that difference? I mean, you know what, you just en passant you talk about it, but it seemed to be interesting and important.
Yeah, there are many things here that could be said further or unpacked. Your first question about this being the consequence, you perhaps let out I think there is a previous passage when I talk about how Creon, she wants to be the consequence of what Creon does, because the way in which Creon can act, what he does, the implication of what he does could also remain like without any consequences, in the sense of they would simply be swept under the carpet. Everybody would just need to accept it as such, even though there is this, let's say, injustice or wrong that, at least for Antigone, is absolutely blatant and needs to be spoken out. This is wrong. What he does is wrong. So the idea here is that precisely since without Antigone's act, there is no force, nothing that would simply say to Creon, okay, listen, this is not okay. I mean, when Tiresias tries to do this in the play, Creon remains completely resolved, even though it is clear when Tiresias comes to him and says, listen, the city is suffering because of this, this is not at all good, in the name of the common good, there are signs that that the city is really sick and your actions are responsible for this, and he remains stubborn. This is Creon's stubbornness. He is stubbornly fixated to this idea. So nothing happens, but so in Antigone knows that actually the only way to to testify and to bring to the fore the wrong that took place is to be willing to be the consequence in the sense of precisely what happens to there, because then Creon has to make the next step in the next step and the next step and unveil and reveal precisely all the implications of his original decree of his act. So in this sense, I talk about her willing to embody the consequences of this wrong, which is the only way for this wrong to become really publicly visible, kind of inscribed, let's say, into the conscious, into the tissue of the community in a different way as precisely something wrong. So, and I guess that this partly also perhaps already is an answer to the second part of your question, which was about Antigone's insistence as opposed to her stubbornness. I mean here, insistence or perseverance, as another perhaps even better term here, is precisely not something that just insists on her own position. This is not about her position. She insists and persists precisely in this movement of the consequence of what has been done, and kind of fixes this movement. And I guess this is very interesting. Now I'm kind of connecting the two contexts, perhaps in a rather offhand way, but still, I mean, I was kind of impressed, and I also read some things about it, precisely when you mentioned the relationship to Iran and what is going on there, that there are these fixed images, these photographs that are much more important or much more capture the general imaginary of what is going on than just videos would. Just so it's not so much the movement of resistance, the before and after and so on, but it's actually this moment frozen in time, like dialectics in the standstill, at the standstill, as Benjamin would put it, these stills that have the power to actually embody something. So it's interesting also in this way. And okay, we could discuss this also in some other ways and further. But I would say that hers is precisely, it is something that has to do, I would say, with not simply the opposite. It is the opposite of movement, but it is precisely a movement in standstill, at a standstill. It's not simply being in the position, but there is something of the movement also, let's say, of emancipatory movement itself, which crystallizes in this fixed figure of Antigone.
Interesting. Another thing that I could relate to, and you also, I mean, in Antigone and also in your book, is discussed, is this the fact of being buried, like the like funeral, which was also an issue in Iran. I mean, after the protest, it was really stunning, the similarities. Something that happens a lot in demonstrations, revolutions, or protests is burial. I mean, you link it to what you call Lacanian realism, to the surplus which cannot be constituted through language, to the parasite. Burial and mourning are pointless, but they offer possibilities, potential, just like Antigone herself. They cause fear in the power. You ask somewhere in the book, interestingly, I'm quoting you, why is a human body released only when it is properly buried? And can you please answer this question and explain the importance of it to us?
Yeah, actually, it is precisely the question of the burial is one of these moments when we can clearly see how insufficient it is to simply think of different things in terms of, let's say, life and death, or whatever, state and family. And so there is something which is in excess in both of them, in access to itself on both sides, and which kind of comes to life precisely in this figure of something, some impossible third that kind of emerges here. In the relationship between life and death, we have these figures of undead, or the living dead, or of the undead, who have been always haunting human imaginary in different ways, which are neither simply dead nor simply alive, but a certain life of death itself, and a certain death that already the life carries in itself, as something, as a dead drive or whatever. So there is, for me, this was very interesting, because I guess these topics of the funeral rites and so on also significant from precisely this perspective. And my idea was precisely that funeral rites are not simply there in order for us to present our respects and to say goodbye to the deceased, but this, which obviously is also the case, but there is something else that needs to be put to rest with this ritual. This ritual actually is aimed at appeasing the very undead surplus of the life itself, or the life of the dead itself, so that kind of prevents death to live on in some other form. So there is this interesting thing, which is in Antigone, this plus the incest, it has a similar structure, this kind of something in life more than life, and something in death more than death, that come together in this question of funeral rites and their importance, and in what happens if they are declined, if they are refused to be. So that what are these corpses? I mean, so this is a very, very powerful image precisely of this undeadness, of this impossibility for the symbolic to close, which is always in a way the other side of the symbolic, which kind of, this undead life is only brought to life with the symbolic, but then you need the symbolic to kind of get rid of the consequences of its own gesture, of its own act, so to say. Yeah, so this was basically the perspective from which I, in much detail, and also in some further discussions of this relationship to nature, to sexuality, and so on, I discuss this. Yeah.
Great. I mean, although you don't necessarily discuss funeral and burial from an affective point of view, there is an in relation to that, I have another question. You say that, I'm quoting you, you say that death, I'm quoting you, death is not simply an outer limit of life, and funeral rituals are never simply a way of honoring the deceased, of paying one's last respects, and so on. Although they are that too, they are a way of making death coincide with itself, end of quote. But I mean, I found it really, I mean, your explanation in the book and already here, I found it really illuminating. But it equally the other day reminded me of the psychic power of the burial, of mourning. I was thinking of what if Antigone needs to bury her brother, because only then she will be able to mourn in reality, or in real. It reminded me even of Alexander Michelisz, Die Unfähigkeit zu trauern, the like inability to mourn, the book, and that I mean, but I was reading the book. I don't know if you want to add something. I just wanted to mention that a short passage from a book on actually it was on, it's called Imagining the End, from an American writer and also psychoanalyst, Jonathan Lear. Like 2 sentences from that book helped me to sort of come into terms with what I was feeling. I'm quoting from him: "Being remembered and being mourned and honored is a persisting good. But in the case of the death of all humanity, we are confronted with the prospect of the end of the mourning itself. We, the hearers of the joke, are thus to be the last generation of mourners." So end of quote. So yeah, do you think that mourning in itself is also important in Antigone?
Yeah, I mean, it is true that I kind of live this aspect of mourning more or less out, or I actually touch it in different ways, because I think that Antigone's way of mourning precisely cannot be reduced to this, let's say, classical mourning that you have, like, it is not reducible also, I guess, to this kind of idea of as being mortal and frail and vulnerable and so on. It is precisely also insisting on what in all these finitudes and vulnerability and hurt is actually something more or excessive, which can inspire or which can be the ground of something else or different, let's say, or bigger. So it's not simply this kind of so it is a very interesting process, which, yeah, as I said, was not in itself part of my let's say analysis here, but it is important to the way in which you can say, yeah, this is the only way in which Antigone can mourn Polonices, but it's also a way in which the mourning as such is exposed as some excessive act. It's not, this is what I'm saying, it's not simply some kind of, okay, let's now everything will be peaceful. It is actually the very embodiment of the excess of life that comes to life when we mourn. And I think it's very important to keep in mind also this kind of dimension of mourning, which is there precisely in Antigone's act, not only just so that we can then let go, but also to allow for something in the thing that we want to let go to not, or to let go or not of us. So it's not simply the question of our subjective position in this and I'm not sure if this makes any sense, but it is. But for sure, this question would deserve more of an attention, and it is in itself that the very, I mean, even the history of acts of mourning, and you have also this old tradition of mourners who were hired actually to weep at the funerals. Like, that this is not, it sounds, I don't know, today to us to something hypocritical, but I guess there you can see again how you hire people to weep for you, to mourn in your place, which is supposed to be the most impossible thing. But in a way, it does work. I mean, there is certain objective, excessive element in the mourning itself, and I think this is precisely, it comes out interestingly in this kind of practices which externalize this extremely subjective moment of mourning. And I don't think this is just because these people didn't care for the people who died and just hired some others to weep, but it could be actually part of a profound distress and process of kind of authentic process of mourning to have this external objectified ritual. Yeah. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, the reason I was tempted to ask this question, or to consider the importance of this question, it was that, like, at least from the background I come from in Shiite Islam, this is a kind of a a kind of affective, there is a kind of affective mobilization in the political sense in Mourning, that you can even, you can fight the power, you know. So I mean, I still think that there is, that's a kind of leverage, there's a kind of power in that, if people learn to mourn politically, you know, like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I was already talking previously about the whole, let's say, Kurdish question. And, you know, there was this famous funeral when, I don't know, 30-something innocent people were killed by Turkish army just because supposedly they were terrorists, which they weren't. They were villagers. And the whole spectacle, we could say, of the Mourning village, which and what they then called the spine, the Kurdish spine. I mean, the people that gathered carrying these caskets and so on. These are really, really powerful images that go beyond simply people needing to pay their respect or to deal emotionally with their loss. They embody a certain access of the communal, of the community also, which gathers there in ways that go, that have sometimes also this kind of if you want, utopian potential to evoke, to embody a certain spirit, a certain beyond just even what kind of physically happened there. So I guess this and it's not again a coincidence that funerals have this emotional charge, but it's also because this charge is never simply subjectively emotional, but it's also objectively emotional. It embodies some kind of, you could even say, free-floating emotions of the social body as such, which nobody directly can claim for themselves, but which are objectively present. The affects, the suffering, or simply the discrepancy, this in-between space. And this public massive funerals can be part of this, and do in fact function now, particularly that we can also watch them on TV and so on, that they have this kind of
in an interview which I found really interesting, you have a very to the point analysis of the situation in Iran and the relation of women. There you just what is let's put it this way: what is happening in Iran is very much in line with what is happening in most Western countries, especially the US, in terms of privatization. I mean, in that interview, you say that the Iranian regime is no less privatized and no less neoliberal as its enemies. You say in that interview that women have been obliged, if I'm right, to use this word, to function as the only difference, perhaps the only difference from the outside. Can I go a bit further and say that inside and outside Iran, Iranian women have been taken hostage as those who should represent a difference? So inside Iran, through difference from Western decadence, and outside Iran, through the difference from Muslim or Arab barbarism.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I really think, I mean, I'm glad that you brought this up, because I think we really need to repeat in this historical moment again and again and again that what is happening now in Iran has to be considered beyond this cliche of either authoritarian theocratic regime or this kind of westernized liberal government. And I think this is really important. I mean, from all the information that I have, as you said, the way that the country functioned in this, let's say, political economic way, everything that happened, not only the privatization and so on, but also the complicity with the international monetary fund, and then what happened after the crisis, the printing of money and the giving of this money not to production but to banks, to private banks, which were in fact not private in the sense of relating to the private sector but to the government fractions. And so I mean it's a complicated story, I know, but my basic point is that, like, economically speaking, and economically I mean the very foundations of the social economy, the difference with the West is minimal, if it even exists. It's here the rules. There is this kind of a terrible sameness. It's even worse than there is no alternative to the West here, and I guess this is precisely why women were kind of forced or chosen by the government, because this repression concerning hijab even reinforced later, became stronger in last year. So there was this, women were actually taken hostages to represent the difference, whereas all this anti-Western rhetorics was actually very much also part of camouflage of the corruption and of looting of communal resources that were going on. So this is, I guess, this is why I guess it's extremely important not to kind of seed into easily to this lazy leftist reflex, which says, okay, but all we see now, all they want now is, I don't know, a new couple of McDonald's and Disneylands and so on, so that they want to be like the rest of the West. No, this is not, I guess, what is going on there. The battlefield is, the struggle is a kind of universal struggle, and it precisely cannot be reduced to this position of just we want to be. No, there is something else that can come out of it if we actually take time to consider, to take their side, not just trying to predict in advance, anyway, this will just become, if the revolt succeeds, another of these boring Western countries that we live in, which is another, I guess, almost, I'm tempted to say, racist position to have to these places where these kind of revolutions take place, because they supposedly need to do something for us so that we would feel better. But anyway, I really think this there are these slogans, neither East nor West, neither leader nor king or Shah. So clearly there are parts of the Iranian, whatever is going on, which want to hijack or present this just as a kind of, we want to align with the West. But I don't think this is the core of the protest. The protests are quite unique in the way that they're formulating, and I guess we surely should not simply let this, let's say, secular neoliberal part of the Iranian elite to manipulate this movement and to present it in their own way. So I guess this is very, and by the way, I think this kind of, this anti-West, now this has become some kind of a symbol of West against something else. But this is so empty in a way. I mean, this is precisely empty of all interesting kind of politics that would have some consequences, that would actually mean something. Because I think there is something, if you look at the Iranian government, or if you look at Putin's strategy, for example, now he also succeeds mobilizing an important part of, let's say, the global left. He is not providing any real alternative politics or economic model, but bets his cards entirely on this anti-Western rhetorics, which is empty of any true alternative, yet still has the power to attract, I don't know, part of the global left, in which anti-Western remains also the only content of otherwise empty political struggle, and this is the problem. I think if we have the situation when the only remaining idea is that the world will be a better place if we have more than one bully, more than one state that prevails, like the US. So that this would be better, that we have a kind of more bullies competing for hegemony. I think this is a bad word, but the left has adopted this strange doctrine sometimes of I would put it like this, of the invisible hand of the market of bullies, who is the, so hoping for, I don't know what trickle-down benefit would result from this bully market economy. But there is no, okay, perhaps it's better to have three than just one, but there is no difference in let alone a difference for something. So I guess this is a kind of similar trap that perhaps the discussion of Iran is kind of involved into. But I guess there is so many important things going on there that we should really listen very carefully and support precisely what is the neither nor there, because this exists. It's the neither nor that one would need to support, and not just look for these proofs of, oh, this is just like this, or this is just like that. Sorry, this was a bit
beautiful, Alenka. Thank you very much for the relevant answer. Yet, like, apropos war, now that you're talking about it, another concern of the Iranians inside and outside is the possibility of war. It is something that can be hijacked by the reactionary regime in repressing the opposition, but on the other hand, it can be something real because it happened in Iraq, it happened in Afghanistan. In one of the classical books, now classic book about war, I was just like, I was just curious to read something about like the new forms of war. There is a book, New and Old War, by Marie Calder. In that book, Calder argues that she's partly influenced by Baudrillard, and she argues that we are entering in the era of new forms of war. Through globalization and multinational cooperations, we are not anymore having these kind of nation-state wars. We are having new kinds of war. And in a sense, even some people talk about hybrid war. Yeah. And to what extent do you think that people in humanities need to develop these concept of new wars and implement them in their analysis of the situation, let's say, like now in Iran?
Yeah, I
if it
think,
is sensible.
yeah, no, I hope I did understand the question correctly. First of all, I think we have all kinds of wars, also the old classical wars. What is going on now in some parts of the world are still like wars in the traditional sense of the term. But yeah, there are also this kind of different kind of wars, or different kind of, if you want, also revolutions or fights, struggles, which are not, which are precisely, I would say simply, I would put it simply like this. As you said, we saw the story in Afghanistan, we saw the story in Iraq, and so on. Although, or perhaps even more, that there was the Arab Spring, this is a different kind of situation, slightly than, so there is this kind of a thing that we see and we say, okay, but not only nothing came out of it, nothing really new and positive, but in many cases it got even worse, in a sense that even the existing infrastructure of these countries was completely demolished, so that they would even cannot even function on the level that they had like prior to this, whatever Western American coming to their rescue. So we have these stories. What I'm saying is that what we should not do is just to make this kind of a general claim in advance. Nothing can happen because we are so convinced of this devil, which is a devil, but still that we cannot even allow for the possibility of something in a different way somewhere to perhaps break through this and have some other consequences other than just this demolition. And I think that what you said, that there are these kind of different wars and different kinds of fighting, of struggles, also in relationship to the classical class struggle, which obviously still goes on, but at the same time takes a slightly different forms perhaps than just strikes, because most of the people are even don't have a job or syndicate to organize and to strike in this classical way. So to be able to see these new forms, as you suggest, and not dismiss them in advance of, this is not, this does not resemble a true revolution or a true, this is wrong, because okay, we can say this, but I mean, it's not enough to act upon what we recognize as an already existing model of whatever, revolt, revolution, and so on. Things are being invented in this shifting situation, and some of these inventions, or at least one perhaps, just might work, even if the others do not, but precisely not dismiss or kind of pronounce this kind of self-fulfilling prophecies when the left say, okay, but this, we know how this will end. And then, of course, no wonder that it ends precisely in this way, because nothing was really done also from within the Western leftists to prevent this. But there was this kind of immediate giving up on the desire, at least, of something that could have happened there.
Yeah, I mean, it is usually justified through the politics of sanctions, because people are already suffering from sanctions. They can fear that the next step can be really war. You know, like I mean, I have contact with the people who are from lower middle class level of society in Iran, and they are absolutely dissatisfied, and they are actually the targets of the sanctions. I mean, me as diaspora here, or a lot of Iranians here, they are not actually affected. You know, I'm living the life of a German person.
No, I guess this is clear that the sanctions, as is usually the case, affect the people. Whereas the government and the elite, not only that they are not directly affected, but they can also use sanctions precisely as the cover of their own misdoings, of their own corruption, of their own robbing of the people of something, and of their own, so they are profiting even from the sanctions in a ways that can be materially proven, because this is another kind of economy that takes place because of the sanctions, in which certain people can profit. So it is not at all that it is, there is a certain layer of the, country to which this is absolutely profitable. So it's not, but at the same time, the sanctions can also be used very well, precisely because people do suffer, as this kind of weapon in the fight to demonize the West, and to say, okay, see how horrible they are, what they are doing to you. Of course, but this is very important, because this is not, it is true, people do suffer. This is not to say they do not, but their own government kind of puts it in this position where there is no other way in which this kind of double hostage, they're double hostages of both of the West and of their own government. And this is really what makes the situation explosive, implosive, and again, what kind of puts this in a close relationship to Antigone, perhaps, who also, in a way, is a double hostage of certain family tradition, of certain public law, and so on. Okay, this is perhaps a too quick analogy, but so the sanctions are definitely a problem.
I mean, I also have these hasty conclusions sometimes. That sometimes I think that, like, back in the back of my mind, unconsciously, I'm just thinking that my criteria to trust somebody or to listen to somebody is that if that person is double hostage or not. So I just think that it has been a yardstick for me, unfortunately, because it is as if you're just looking for victims, as if you need victims to listen to, which is quite hard. And Alenka, I have a couple of questions. Do you have time? Just like or
yeah, we can go on for
okay.
if you have some,
Okay, so I mean, I have one question, the last question about this project, and like 1-2 questions about your previous projects, one on comedy and the other on Nietzsche, perhaps. So the one that you, I mean, interestingly, you talked about it in the beginning. Towards the end of the book, in the last pages of the book, you say that, I'm quoting you, I started this book by pointing out that Antigone comes into focus of writing and interpretation every time there is some significant tectonic shift or crisis in the social fabric, in the symbolic structuring of the law, or in the wider realm of morality or Sittlichkeit. This is because Antigone's singular fate embodies a structural impasse in the symbolic order, the impasse that comes to light particularly at a moment of crisis and requires a restructuring of the symbolic order. More precisely, Antigone does not embody this structural impasse, but rather the excess that it inevitably produces. She is a subjective figure of this excess that shatters its ruthless objective accumulation. End of quote. I would be happy if you, I mean, you just tell me what was the crisis that made you think of writing an Antigone? What was there? What was this? I mean, we
you mean like my crisis?
No.
I mean, okay, the book was written in the middle of the crisis of the life. This was in the middle of the COVID years, which were critical in perhaps different sense, that we talk of financial crisis, but still there was a crisis, and there was a certain standstill that took place at that moment. So basically, it was written but I wouldn't say it was a response directly to any of these things, although okay, even the question of the funeral rites kind of resonated very, very strongly in this moment, when bodies were like lying around in some places without the possibility of burying them and so on. So it was definitely, but I think that in general, and this was really a kind of a remark that something that I noticed in relationship, for instance, there are this reimagining of Antigone in the context of the so-called war on terrorism and what was going on there, in the context of the so-called refugee crisis and so on. So we were already, and there were this, just in the past 6 or 7 years, several new versions of Antigone emerged, and these were years in which the social, as I said, the social tissue was already starting to being shattered through all kinds of different problems, including, of course, and I think this is absolutely something that needs to be mentioned, the financial crisis, the way it was handled, and the way this kind of demanded a restructuring again of the whole symbolic functioning, including the symbolic functioning of capital, which no longer functions in this traditional way of just extracting profit from underpaid workers, but through the speculative markets, more and more buying their own stock and so on. So there is something there which is shifting our new symbolic universe. And so I guess the point that I was making there was precisely that, in a way, in different contexts, Antigone is also a figure that embodies that takes upon herself, let's say, and carries, confronts us with what I call in some other paper, and it's kind of a systemic, objective, apersonal enjoyment, because we usually associate, enjoyment only with subjective enjoyment. Somebody really enjoying, but there is a lot of what we could call objective systemic enjoyment around, and the system is actually bursting with it, exploding, imploding with it, without necessarily there being a subjective figure to embody in the sense to present us, to again to be that consequence, to kind of carry the this is one of the reasons, I think one of them. I'm not saying that this is like exhausts the power of this figure or this configuration, but it is definitely an important factor.
Thank you very much for the explanation, but the book does not really talk about anything, let's say, directly immediately moral, except that towards the end of the book you have this interesting quote. I'm just reading that: egocentrism is not a land of subjective singularities, it is rather like a factory, an assembly line of individualities, all similar, if not all the same, adhering to a set of predetermined choices that exclude many others as utterly unthinkable, impossible. I was the other end of quote. I was the other day thinking of this adjective, like, do we have collective egocentrism? Like, I mean, I was thinking perhaps like a lot of identity politics today can go that way, can just stick to their own particularities without thinking of solidarity, without thinking of these collectivity in the sense of like sharing with others. And do you think it is possible to relate it to identity politics?
I mean, what I say there, it's already, it refers to something that started to exist already before the famous and infamous identity politics. It started to rule, so to say, almost the Western Hemisphere on the side, let's say, of some kind of left, but it's this kind of idea, that we are all so unique and that we have to kind of be ourselves and express ourselves and do things that we want as ourselves and so on. And that actually this only remains, this diversity, this freedom of choice, blah, blah, this only remains within a very narrow confines of a certain fundamental choice where we have no right to change it. It is a kind of, there is a certain choice made for us, so to say, within which we can remain as colorful as we want. But the moment that somebody questions this or tries to make something different that really makes a difference, everything starts, the panic starts. And so this the factory of the egos was this. It's also, I guess, a reference to something that Lacan says at some point, but these are, in all their differences, they're basically the same. There is no fundamental difference that is at stake here. And I think, that Antigone is also important in this respect, because perhaps one thing, and this is why I end with the question of desire there precisely, with Antigone and desire, is that, we got used to talk about desire as something that we express our desires. But this is now how the very fundamental functioning of desire could be grasped. For instance, and again, I think this was become very obvious and palpable also in some of the analysis that I got this from some of the analysis of the protests in Iran and now, which is this shift from some previous stages of the also feminist movement or protests against the scarf and so on, which is simply people putting down the scarf, showing their faces and women telling them what they want about their desires. And there was a certain shift from this kind of a narrative, I have desire and my desire is, yes, perhaps more or less westernized because it is expressed in this way, to these images that I mentioned before, which are, even though the scarf is off, they are faceless, they are figures standing fixed at some point, and they are not expressing any desire. They are embodying the very revolutionary desire itself, or desire for something. So they are the desire. They are not talking about their desires and their aspirations. I mean, we all have this kind of, which Freud would call wishes more. So it's actually, and I think this shift is very important, and also something that we should not miss. The desire is not about me expressing my desires, what I think are my desires. Desire is also something that relates to the other, is out there, and particularly in these moments of this turmoil and struggle and war, it can be very, very powerful precisely in this posture, not in my heart, but there. And I think in a way, Antigone is also a figure of desire in this way, not that she is emblematic of a certain desire, which is not simply subjective, which is not simply reduced to what she wants or doesn't want, but this kind of desire as such, and also this desire to perhaps be this or embody this moment as well, together precisely with others. And I think this is something that very much lacks in identity politics in most of the cases, because of this I would say almost positivism of it, because in desire there's always this negative element, which actually not negative in the sense of bad, but negative in the sense that cannot be fully filled up with some positive content, but is precisely embodies a certain negativity with which people can identify and feel solidarity with in a very different way than from just like recognizing themselves in this or that or third identity, saying, okay, this is about me, this is about me. No, it's precisely this is not how collective is formed, or this is how bad collectives are formed, like this Gemeinschaft that then expel all the foreign elements because they don't recognize them as part of their Gemeinschaft. So I guess this, and so it is true that I don't think that politically speaking, identity politics is the right answer to this bigger and bigger turmoil and questions that we are dealing with. And that's some other, and this is not just about this sentimental stuff about solidarity, is something that can happen even if you don't want it, but it happens. Or for instance, this is also something that I heard, that there was a certain change when the protest started in Iran. From some previous strikes, when people went on strike, there were these statements of support from other groupations, from other realms of population and organizations and so on. But now what happened was that actually these others also went on strike, which is different kind of logic that just express solidarity with, but to embody yourself, even if you have a different problem, you are a different kind of fraction of this problem, but you embody it with your problem and with your, and this is different by saying, okay, we are solidarity can have many different faces, and this sentimental solidarity is not necessarily the best face of solidarity.
Definitely. Oh, right. I just use this moment to pose my last question. I mean, can I relate your righteous suspicion about such expressions when it comes to now, like identity politics, these kind of expressions, loaded expressions that, yeah, I have to do something to show that, yeah, I am emancipating, or sort of, I mean, a kind of gesture in that regard. Can I relate that to your suspicion about laughter or about mourning, in the sense that it seems that you'd rather talk about comedy than talk about laughter, or you'd rather talk about tragedy than talk about mourning? I mean, are they part of the same mentality, or I'm just like, I'm just connecting them to each other? Because my hunch is that, like in the book on comedy, my hunch is that what is more important for you is exactly this odd one in, this parasite. And this parasite can also be traced in tragedy. So, you know, I mean, this is the logic that fascinates you, the logic of comedy, the logic of tragedy, rather than the expression of comedy, namely laughter, or rather the expression of tragedy, namely weeping or mourning.
No, yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this resounds very well. The core of both of my projects, yeah, because I think it's not only, I mean, laughter can be an interesting phenomenon precisely as this objective form of sentiment, as mourning can be also interesting form of an objective form of suffering. But precisely these are this kind of extreme point, you know, like almost the canned laughter and the artificial tears. But it is what I kind of avoid, because I don't think this is so interesting, is this kind of considering this as the kind of expression of expression of this or that emotion. I mean, tragedy is officially, I mean, even according to Aristotle, it's not about simply expressing these emotions, but about kind of purifying it as getting rid of, you know, so it's because precisely there is a way in which, there is certain logic that defines this space, logic of conflict, of these elements that don't fit in neither of the two, let's say, polarities that meet or whatever, but are actually nevertheless implied in both or in all of them. So there is this element, this conflict, which for me should also be considered as such and not simply covered with emotions, because very often emotions are precisely, they cover up a certain real that is present in certain colors. So it's our response, but this response is only part of the story. It's not the truth. So this is also something which we are now used to say that, okay, if somebody is suffering or laughing or crying, so this is the truth of this situation. No, not necessarily. I mean, it is it is a certain response to some conflict, to something which is, it's not necessarily means that it is more authentic and it can tell us everything about what is going on. And so I guess emotions are really tricky. Obviously they exist, and it's good that they exist. They will always
definitely.
But this kind of affective, this kind of over-evaluation of emotions, of everything, I think is itself a kind of a defense against certain kind of social truths.
I definitely agree with you in that regard, because I think they are actually overrated. I mean, both of these like affective forms or emotions. Yet I don't think that humor, for example, is necessarily absolutely emotional. I mean, can we agree on that point that your project, not unlike Zizek's project, is more based on irony than humor? I mean, you're more into this kind of Aufhebung, this kind of, you know, in the Deleuzian sense of the word, you know, for you. It's interesting in Nietzschean philosophy, if correct me, I'm just like, as we say in Farsi, I'm giving lesson back to my teacher, just repeating it in front of you. Can we agree on the point that psychoanalysis is not necessarily a good friend of humor? I mean, perhaps jokes, perhaps perhaps comedy, but not necessarily humor. I mean, can we agree on that irony is more entertaining for you? I mean, in different levels than humor.
Actually, I
not you personally.
No, personally, I really think, I mean, I also talk about this in the book. I mean, okay, irony can mean many things, but there is a certain way in which I already in the Nietzsche book and then also in comedy book, I go against certain kind of irony, precisely this kind of endless undermining of, you know, or this ironic distance to something which actually
Like what Kierkegaard criticizes,
makes
right?
you even more, you know, fanatic believer, or it makes it possible for you precisely to go on enjoying what you ironically are dismissing all the time, or laughing at, or so on. So also there is one problem with irony, which Harvey, the film theorist, actually pointed out very well, that, for instance, whereas comedy or a good joke kind of unites us, which means that it forms a collective in the sense that either a joke falls flat or we all laugh at it. So if we don't recognize or get the joke, then it doesn't work. And whereas with irony, it seems that it gets only bigger and more strong if half of the audience doesn't get it, because then you have this other dialectics. Okay, I even the stupid, they didn't know it, I'm clever. So there is certain aspect of irony, of this cleverness, over cleverness, which I definitely don't, and of which I'm very suspicious. And actually, I think, again, to use another example from the book, I oppose precisely comedy and irony in this sense, you know, when regarding the title that you evoke, The Odd One In, when, you know, as an example of irony, I take this famous graffiti when somebody writes on the wall, God is dead, Nietzsche, and then somebody writes underneath, Nietzsche is dead, God. And so you can go on. Of course, you know, there is this kind of sweeping the carpet under your statement by pointing out to the weakness of the point of enunciation. There is always the point of enunciation that is the problem. So this is an end. This can be very interesting and humorous process, but it has its limit also in terms of, let's say, emancipation. And my counterexample of comic graffiti that I propose is this other version, which is God is dead, and I'm also not feeling too good. You know, I'm not feeling too good either, which means you count yourself in, and this is how you undermine, if you want, this God. It's you count yourself in and not exempt yourself to a position from which you can mock the others or display the cracks in there, because even if you display cracks in power, in whatever, so it's a good cause, I'm not saying that, but still this demands that your position is somehow exempt from this conflict, from these cracks that you are mocking. And this for me is not the right humor, it's not the right comedy. So I would still not endorse, but okay, there are different kinds of irony, perhaps, in people. What you have in Kierkegaard is perhaps slightly different. So, but what is generally perceived as this ironic move and this kind of ironic pointing out the cracks in the other, there is something about this that I don't think is the best of what comedy or humor can offer us.
Perfect. Alenka, thank you very much indeed.